Yes, for they were not preparing a roof for a future banqueting hall. And pines or firs were not continually being drawn through streets trembling at their passage on a long convoy of vehicles to support panelled ceilings heavy with gold. Their huts were held up by a forked pole, stood at either end, and with close-packed branches and a sloping pile of leaves, a runoff was arranged for even heavy rains. This was the kind of roof under which they lived, and yet their lives were free of care. For men in a state of freedom had thatch for their shelter, while slavery dwells beneath marble and gold. Another matter on which I disagree with Posidonius is his belief that it was by wise men that tools were originally invented. On that sort of basis, there is nothing to stop him saying that it was by philosophers that discovered next were ways of snaring game, of catching birds with lime, of setting dogs all round deep woods. It was human ingenuity, not wisdom, which discovered all that. I disagree with him again, where he maintains that it was wise men who discovered iron and copper mining, when the earth had been scorched by a forest fire and had melted to produce a flow from surface veins of ore. The person who discovers that sort of thing is the kind of person who makes it his business to be interested in just that sort of thing. Nor, for that matter, do I find it as nice a question as Posidonius does, whether the hammer started to come into general use before the tongs or the other way round. They were both invented by some individual of an alert, perceptive turn of mind, but not one with the qualities of greatness or of inspiration. And the same applies to anything else, the quest of which involves a bent back and an earthward gaze. The wise man then followed a simple way of life, which is hardly surprising when you consider how even in this modern age he seeks to be as little encumbered as he possibly can. How, I ask you, can you consistently admire both Daedalus and Diogenes? Tell me which of these two you would say was a wise man, the one who hit on the saw, or the one who, in seeing a boy drinking water from the hollow of his hand, immediately took the cup out of his knapsack and smashed it, telling himself off for his stupidity in having superfluous luggage about him all that time, and curled himself up in a jar and went to sleep. And today, just tell me which of the following you consider the wiser man. The one who discovers a means of spraying saffron perfumes to a tremendous height from hidden pipes, who fills or empties channels in one sudden rush of water, who constructs a set of interchangeable ceilings for a dining room in such a way as to produce a constant succession of different patterns with a change of ceiling at each course, or the one who proves to others and to himself that nature makes no demand on us that is difficult or hard to meet, and that we can live without the marble worker and the engineer, that we can clothe ourselves without importing silks, that we can have the things we need for our ordinary purposes if we will only be content with what the earth has made available on its surface. If they only care to listen to this man, the human race would realize that cooks are as unnecessary to them as are soldiers. That race of man to whom taking care of the body was a straightforward enough matter were, if not philosophers, something very like it. The things that are essential are acquired with little bother. It is the luxuries that call for toil and effort. Follow nature, and you will feel no need of craftsmen. It was nature's desire that we should not be kept occupied thus. She equipped us for everything she required us to contend with. But the naked body can't stand cold. So what? Are the skins of wild beasts and other creatures not capable of giving us more than adequate protection against the cold? Is it not a fact that many peoples make a covering for their bodies out of bark, that feathers are sewn together to serve as clothing, that even today the majority of the Scythians wear the pelts of fox and mice, which are soft to the touch and impervious to wind? Are you going to tell me, too, that any people you care to mention never use their hands to weave a basket-work of wattles, smear it all over with common mud, and then cover the whole roof with long grass stems and other material growing wild, and went through winter weather, the rain streaming down the slopes of the roof, without any worry? But we need some pretty dense shade to keep off the heat of the sun in summer. So what? Have past ages not left us plenty of hiding places that have been carved out by the ravages of time, or whatever other cause one cares to suppose, and have developed into caves? And again, is it not a fact that Sirtian tribes take shelter in pits dug into the ground, as do other people, who, because of extreme sun temperatures, find nothing less than the baked earth itself sufficiently substantial as a protective covering against the heat? When nature granted all the other animals a simple passage through life, she was not so unfair to man as to make it impossible for him alone, to live without all these skills. Nature demanded nothing hard from us, and nothing needs painful contriving to enable life to be kept going. We were born into a world in which things were ready to our hands. It is we who have made everything difficult to come by, through our own disdain for what is easily come by. Shelter and apparel, and the means of warming body and food, all the things which nowadays entail tremendous trouble, were there for the taking, free to all, obtainable at trifling effort, with everything the limit corresponded to the need. It is we and no one else who have made those same things costly, spectacular, and obtainable only by means of a large number of full-scale techniques. Nature suffices for all she asks of us. Luxury has turned her back on nature, daily urging herself on, and growing through all the centuries, pressing men's intelligence into development of the vices. First, she began to hanker after things that were inessential, and then after things that were injurious, and finally, she handed the mind over to the body and commanded it to be the out-and-out slave of the body's whim and pleasure. All those trades that give rise to noise or hectic activity in the city are in business for the body, which was once in the position of the slave, having everything issued to it, and is now the master, having everything procured for it. This is the starting point for textile and engineering workshops, for the perfumes used by chefs, the sensual movements of our dancing teachers, even sensual and unmanly songs. And why? Because the bounds of nature, which set a limit to man's wants, by relieving them only where there is necessity for such relief, have been lost sight of. To want simply what is enough nowadays suggests to people primitiveness and squalor. It is incredible, Lucilius, how easily even great men can be carried away from the truth by the sheer pleasure of holding forth on a subject. Look at Posidonius, in my opinion, one of those who have contributed most to philosophy, when he wants to give a description of how, in the first place, some threads are twisted and others drawn up, particularly by means of hanging weights, and how the weft, worked in to soften the hard texture of the warp threads, which compress it on either side, is made compact and close by means of the batten. He declares that philosophers invented the art of the weaver too, forgetting that philosophers had disappeared by the time this comparatively advanced type of weaving had been evolved. The warp is bound to the beam, and then its threads are parted by the reed, the woof worked in between with pointed shuttles and pressed home by the broad comb's fretted teeth. He might have thought differently if he had only had the opportunity of seeing the looms of the present day, the end product of which is clothing which is not going to conceal a thing, clothing which is no help to modesty, let alone the body. He then goes on to farmers and gives an equally eloquent description of how the soil is broken up by the plough for the first time and then gone over again in order that the earth, thus loosened, may allow the roots more room to develop, and continues with the sowing of the seed and the lifting of the weeds to prevent any stray wild plants springing up and ruining the crop. All this, too, he represents as being the work of philosophers, as if agriculturists were not, now as ever, discovering plenty of new methods of increasing the soil's productivity. Not content with these occupations, he proceeds to demean the philosopher to the bakery. He tells us how by imitating nature he began producing bread. The grain, he said, is taken into the mouth and crushed by the coming together of the hard surfaces of the teeth. Anything that escapes is carried back to the teeth again by the tongue, and the grain is finally mixed with saliva to enable it to pass down the lubricated throat with greater facility. On reaching the stomach, where it is cooked in an even heat, it is finally absorbed into the system. Taking this process as a model, someone or other placed one rough stone on top of another in imitation of the teeth, one set of which remains immobile and awaits the action of the other. The grains are then crushed by the friction of one against the other, and are constantly resubjected to it until they are reduced by this repeated grinding to a fine powder. He then sprinkled the resulting meal with water, and by going on manipulating it, he made it plastic and shaped it